All right, welcome to our quick introduction to FRQ writing for AP Psychology, or as I like to call it, FRQ writing for AP Psych 101. Okay, it's a lecture and a little bit of an activity, really, since you're probably doing it on your own. It's more of a thinking activity than anything else. But introducing this idea of FRQs and talking a little bit about formatting and how we write them. My name is, of course, Chris Gall, and I wrote today's lecture and activity. So the first thing you got to know about FRQs is that they're going to be 1/3 of your score on the overall exam. Okay, there's going to be two of them on the exam. One that's based around research and research techniques, but can include ideas from other units. And the second one that is an application-based question and will include several of the units, and so could include any of the vocabulary and the terms that you're learning this year. On the exam, you've got 50 minutes total to complete both questions. They are going to ask you to write in dark blue or black pen. And they do that because it makes it much easier for the readers. So don't forget your FRQ, which looks super sharp in pencil when you write it here in Washington, then gets packaged up by our AP coordinator and shipped across country to Princeton, New Jersey, where it then gets sorted and separated and sent down to Florida, which is where the AP psychology reading is. And then it gets passed around a bunch of times in Florida. And so as a result, anywhere from 2 to 3 people typically will read these things. I should say 1 to 3, really. And anything written in pencil can get really smudgy. So they ask you to write in pen to make it a lot easier on the readers. Okay. To get the point when you're writing an FRQ for AP Psychology, you need to do more than just definitions. You also need to apply the term to the scenario supplied. And if they don't give you a specific scenario, then you need to go ahead and provide the scenario yourself. Okay, but you need to have that application piece. That is what it requires to get the points. All right, so every year at the AP reading, they give you some general considerations, things that as a reader you should remember. And these are the ones for AP Psychology. And they stay pretty consistent year to year. These ones are from 2019. So first thing to know is that you need to write sentences. Bullet points are not enough. And they need to be able to be understood. Okay, so spelling and grammar don't reduce your score if they're bad, unless it is bad enough to ensure that the reader cannot understand what you're trying to say. All right, so if you spell brain, B-R-I-A-N, right, you say Brian instead of brain, they'll figure it out based on content. That's close enough. If you spell brain like spine, that's a problem. So you want to make sure that your spelling is good enough, your grammar is good enough, but it doesn't need to be perfect. And I know that will take some of the stress off of some of you guys, where you're worried about sentence structure and things like that. Okay. They don't get to score any notes made on the question section of the booklet, and the questions themselves are embedded in the same booklet that you'll write your answers in. Okay. They only score the responses that are written on the lines is really kind of the way to think about that. Okay. Again, definitions alone don't score, but it's a good idea to start with a definition and then go on and apply it. Okay, because they do enhance that application. Within a single point, you don't get penalized for misinformation unless it contradicts information that would have otherwise scored a point. So a correct application with an incorrect definition is not considered a direct contradiction, and should score the point. The rubric examples that are provided for each point, we'll look at some of these, are not considered to be exhaustive. So there are plenty of ways to get the points without saying exactly what is on the rubric, but you do need to say something close. Okay. And responses only score points if it clearly conveys what part of the question is being answered. And this is the part where I tell you to label the parts of the question. Okay, so write the A with the period next to it, or with the parenthesis next to it, okay? Because that's just the easiest way to label your parts of the question. It really is, okay? It is possible to infer what part of the question is being answered if it's consistent with the order of the question. And another way to label the parts of your question is to directly repeat the prompt as the first part of your answer. Then it's clear what part of the question you're trying to answer. All right. I will say though, honestly, I read the AP Human Geography exam, it's so much nicer when kids just label the parts. It really does make it easier to tell what part is supposed to go where. So this is the prompt for the first question for the set 2 of the 2019 psychology FRQs. All right, and in 2019 they started doing 2 sets, one for the East Coast, one for the West Coast, because the East Coast kids would finish first. And I love teenagers, but teenagers are bobo heads sometimes. And every single year you get kids who post the topics of the questions. And so what they were trying to do is foil cheating by kids who would go through and look on Twitter or on Snapchat or Instagram and see what they could find for what the FRQ topics are and then do some last minute studying. Okay, so that's why the 2 sets. But let's go ahead and look at the prompt here. It says, Professor Mendez conducted an experiment to investigate the effects of a new medication for treating the symptoms of obsessive compulsive disorder. All right, so that's our setup. Now we know what we're working on applying our information to. All right, Part A, and we're only going to look at Part A for today. Explain the concept of compulsion in the context of obsessive compulsive disorder. Okay, and you can see by looking, and I will do a little bit with the rest just because I want to explain the point breakdown. Okay, so Part A is 1 point. It's got 1 part to it, 1 point. Part B, okay, explain why each of the following would be used in this experiment to help establish cause and effect. So you've got random assignment and you've got placebo condition. Okay, and each one of those is going to be its own point. So that's 2 points for Part B. For Part C, right, Professor Mendez presented the research at an international conference. After the presentation, audience members met in small groups to discuss their research. Explain how each of the following may affect the attendees' discussion of the research. So that's what you got to talk about, okay, is the discussion of the research. And then we've got groupthink, display rules, belief perseverance, and the cocktail party effect. So because there's 4 different bullet points there, that's going to be 4 different points for Part C. All right, and as you can see with each part, you get a little bit further in, you get a little bit harder. And for Part B, to score the points, you would have to specifically explain how they establish cause and effect. All right, but like I said, we're going to look at Part A. So when you go to look at the scoring criteria for Part A, this is what was on the scoring criteria. Okay, it says responses must indicate that a compulsion is a repetitive behavior or mental act, for example, counting, in response to an obsession, or done to reduce anxiety or distress. So, for example, Jamal washes his hands a lot to reduce his anxiety, would score a point, right? Ricardo wants to wash his hands all the time because he thinks it will make him feel better. Does not score a point because desires, right, his beliefs, his needs, his wants, are not a behavior. Okay, and feeling better doesn't necessarily mean that you're reducing anxiety or distress. Maybe you're just feeling better because you're not worried about how your hands smell, right? And that's not the same thing as being anxious or distressed because of what goes on. Amy tidies her room regularly does not score because it's not a response to an obsession, nor is it done to reduce anxiety. So what you're looking for is something that references both the repetitive behavior or mental act, and it's got a reference that it's done in response to an obsession or to reduce anxiety or distress. And you have to have both parts or you don't score the point. So one of the things the College Board does, first of all, they release all of these publicly so you can get the questions for the last roughly 20 years. You can also get the scoring criteria. So I just pulled this off the College Board's website. And they do sample essays. And they do 3 sample essays per prompt, which is actually really nice because they do high, medium, and low ones. So let's take a quick look at this one. A compulsion is a reoccurring urge to do something. So that's that definition. Okay. For example, you might feel a strong urge to check to make sure the stove is off every 15 minutes and feel like if you don't, your house will burn down. So pause the video for a minute and think about that. And if you need to, rewind it so you can look at that scoring criteria. Okay. And see if you think it scores a point. Okay. So here's the thing. The other part of those packets where they release the sample essays and so forth, they also include what's called the head reader's commentary, which explains why points were given or not. So in this one, it didn't earn a point because there is no reference to behavior. There's no reference to behavior being performed. So let me take that back a slide so we can actually see what we're talking about here. Okay, so they feel a strong urge to check and make sure the stove is off. But this is not a behavior. So to earn credit, what this student would have needed to do was say, for example, you might check the stove every 15 minutes to see if it is off because you are worried if you don't, your house will burn down. So you have to have that behavior. And that's what's missing here. And this was a student who scored all of the other points, all the other 6 points, but this one he missed because he didn't specifically talk about behavior. All right, so you've got to be very careful, make sure you're referencing what the prompt says. So if you're talking about a compulsion, remember compulsions are behaviors. Your brain is requiring you to do something. It's not enough to feel like you need to do something. You have to actually go out and do it. All right, so if you have questions or comments, please go ahead, bring them into class, and I'd love to talk about them more. And we'll keep talking about FRQs as we go through the class. In the meantime, I will see you next time class meets.